Hello, everybody, to an expert interview here at the Mind Games community. As you can see, I'm currently in the middle of nowhere, and it's quite of an strange environment in that I am here in New Zealand. I'm on the road currently, so I hope you forgive me this setup. Today with me is Tim Hoffmann. He was working for Ubisoft and is now the lead of DevOps tools and pipelines at YAGER. Tim is a very old friend of me, and I wanted to ask him for some advice. And I thought it might be also interesting to you. So we record this communication, this session that we're having. And Tim, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for the invitation.
Wonderful. Yeah. So there's something that for us as game designers is, of high interest. It's quite often kind of a black box that we are facing, and you as game developers, you're doing kind of magic within that black box, and we don't know what happens in there. I am speaking about the bridge between game design and game development. And since a lot of people here in this community are doing design or concepts and then giving over their concepts to game developers, we would now put a spotlight specifically on this part of the process, what happens after the concept. So I will jump directly into the question. We as game designers, we are doing a concept, for instance, in the shape of a game design document. And then we hand it over to you as game developers. And what happens now with our game design document? Please let us know.
Um, First of all, maybe a little disclaimer regarding my background and my work. I have a background in game design, also game producing is what I learned together with programming. But what I'm doing today in my daily work is not really working on the game content, but as my title suggests, on the tools for the actual game programming teams and so on, and the whole game development teams. Um, Second thing to note, I find it interesting that you're differentiating between game designers and game developers, whereas I would say also many people would use the term game developers as an overarching term that includes both designers and programmers as well as artists and everybody who actually works on the game. So there might be some interesting perspectives already hidden in there. And then yes, with what happens with a game design document, as far as I'm involved and what I've seen, this is maybe where you can already start the discussion. Does it make sense to hand over a complete document and then have somebody else decide how to split it and how to execute it or so? I think this could be questioned in the first place. Maybe you could rather think of, for example, teams that are interdisciplinary in the first place, and maybe not in the super early concept phase, but as early as possible, where you could then have people with technical background, but also potentially artists or people from audio, as well as game designers, decide what should be worked on first. And I would say there are some typical candidates that you would try to identify to work on first. And one thing, I guess, or one lens that you could look at or look through is by dividing your game into, for example, core features and features that are less essential to your game. If you have a game that is like a physics sandbox, and that's the whole USP, the unique selling proposition of the game, then probably it doesn't make sense to focus on, I don't know, like car driving, which might also be in the game, but just a little thing. But it makes sense to actually work on the core feature, the physics
Yeah,
stuff, so that you can make a proof of concept or a working prototype that actually proves your idea, and works on that. Another thing, or actually it's might be the same thing, is I think I've heard the term like onion design. This is also about core features and then features around it, that you just say, for example, high risk features where you have really high uncertainty how this could be done, maybe even if you can do it or if it can be done, then it might make sense to start working on those. Another thing that must be considered is, like, I'm coming more from a background of bigger games, like I don't know, like AA or maybe AAA games. I think in that area you have much longer development times compared
mm,
to maybe at least like some types of indie games or maybe some types of serious games that I could imagine. So there it also makes much more sense to think about the product life cycle and the whole development life cycle.
yeah,
So you would start with a with working really on a vertical slice, for example, that has the goal of building a short experience, typically something like you would say one level that has everything included, and every discipline is involved to make that as good as possible. And the goal is then to project this to a full production where you can replicate this whole thing that you executed for one level, let's say for 10 levels, to make it a full game.
I see. Perhaps let's jump in directly here because I think that's super interesting, the vertical slice component. So we have this vertical slice, which is, for instance, one level with all the features that kind of already give a good idea of the experience that the user will have. This vertical slice somehow needs to be designed, needs to be conceptualized. There, somebody, a team of people have an idea, then they think about, okay, we could do this. This is our game design. And they will probably also, as you were suggesting, are already including interdisciplinary teams like developers and artists at the same time to create this kind of concept, right? Um, but if we, it doesn't really matter now for us in this one here, if we are speaking about like one game designer who is doing a concept and handing it over, or if we like have a now cross functional team that is doing this concept. But let's say we have this concept, yeah? And what do we do now in order to get the coding going? You know, how do we really get the people to work with the concept that we were doing? How do you do the prioritization? How do you cut this concept into pieces, into work packages? What is your strategy and who is doing that?
Again, I think the some of the examples I gave are tools, or lenses that you could look through, how to decide what to prioritize, what to start working on first. Also, in typical games like first person games or third person games, another very classic thing to start is with the three C's: camera, character, and the controls. So those basic things. And I would say, in my opinion, it is really important to not see these things as two phases, like design first and then implementation, but it's a cycle of iterations. So from the direction of design, maybe makes a concept, has an idea about a core feature, and then they talk, for example, to some concept artists, and they breathe some visual life into it, so that actually other people's, for example, programmers, have a better picture and can understand what the design intent is, because it's, I think, really like one of the most important concepts that I have learned, or that I have read about and understood as something very important, is clarity of vision. Like, you need to, the bigger the team and the more ambitious the project, the more clear the vision needs to be to get everybody on the same page. There's actually a study about that. I think it's called the Game Outcomes Project, where they past game productions that were successful and not so successful. And one of the core things they learned from that was that the more successful games had the much clearer visions. So that helps to get people aligned. So let's say you have that vision, you have maybe some concept visuals that you could start with, and some core features. And then at the latest point, I could imagine that you sit together with some programmers and talk about, okay, how could we implement this? Is it clear to you? And the part talking is important. Iteration and talking. I wouldn't try to hand over a game design document and expect it to be implemented as I imagined. I think a game design document is probably rather something to help for additional reference, but it's only one aspect. I think it's probably much more important to talk together, to challenge ideas. I mean, even if you have programmers that you present your feature to as a game designer, they might have additional input, even to the game design part. They might tell you things that are actually super hard to do and ask you if it's really beneficial for, or is it really needed, or could we maybe take a simpler route? Or on the contrary, they might have ideas to make it even more unique, with some technical implementation that you might have not thought of. So yeah,
Okay.
iteration, communication.
Super interesting. So basically, this concept paper or like the game design document would rather serve as a basis for discussion that you can build your upcoming conversations on and iterate basically as an outcome of like the discussions that you have with each other in this cross-disciplinary team. Okay. But sooner or later, I believe that you need to do some decisions, right? So you need to say, okay, we have the game design document perhaps as a basis, but we iterated on certain aspects. We have new ideas, we have new prioritizations, and now we need to set things somehow we have to agree on things in order to get to work, you know? And what is this? Do you have any type of process that supports this in a way? You know, like if we think of sprint planning, Scrum, or is there like any other processes or tools that you are using from these discussions towards decisions, towards actions and actual work, coding, or
Mm,
you know?
I think there it might make sense to differentiate where you are in the development life cycle. Um, in the beginning, it should be very much the focus on agile practices, lightweight processes as much as possible, so that you can iterate as fast as possible with the least overhead. So I would say it might be as simple as, okay, let's decide this is the most risky feature. Let's just try to get it done somehow, so it's playable. And typically you would try to keep the cost low by keeping the fidelity low. So for example, gray box design,
Yeah.
stuff like that, where you don't right away go full quality without knowing if the basic stuff even works. I think after the prototyping, the prototyping is where I would say, in my understanding, that the core purpose or the main goal is to find the fun in your game, to get a prototype that actually is fun, because a game that is not fun, in my definition, probably is not a good game. So you might do this in a chaotic way, and then you might transition to the vertical slice phase, where you start to get things a bit more in order. And typically, some teams say that from the implementation side, art or code, they don't even allow to take what they have already built for the prototype into vertical slice, but really to require to start fresh. You can take all the learnings, but you start from a kind of blank canvas again. And I think there it's where you start to become a bit more involved with processes, and then it also becomes easier to plan things and to divide things, because you have gained some knowledge. Like when you start making a game, really in the early conception and the very early prototyping, you don't really know anything about this game. And it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to think about Scrum and planning tasks. And some tasks you might be able to plan, but not to plan how you implement this and that feature along the way. It's just, you don't even know if the feature is fun. So why taking hours of planning what you will work on this in the next 4 weeks? Maybe tomorrow you realize that you have a much better idea. But once you have that kind of core knowledge built, then you can start planning a bit more precise, I would say, and say, okay, we know that it's makes sense for our game to have a third person character control, for example. But now the jumping doesn't really feel right. Now we should focus on the jumping, and we should specifically focus on the time the character is in the air and how it feels, if how powerful they can jump and so on. And then I think this comes naturally. But yeah, how to then divide that further and really organize that down the road. I would say, I don't know, like if there are, I'm sure there are more approaches for doing that. It looks to me usually like nobody really has kind of found that holy grail how to do that in general in the right way. There might be, I think that there are studios that do a certain type of game, and they have done this multiple times already, and they have a pretty good idea what works for them. And this is also something that I learned. What works for one game or for one team doesn't necessarily work for another. So many foundations, I think, are more or less universal, and actually you could go even more to the basics and say that making games can be seen, or making games can be seen as making software, and making software can be seen as some virtual form of producing goods. So if you see it from a more economical side, many things that people have learned over 200 or years of industrializations or industrialization might apply to some degree to digital goods as well, and in the end to games. So I think very often people seem to think about games as something super unique that is like out of this world. And I think the combination of things is pretty much unique, that you have the interactivity, the audiovisual, and the technical part that all come together. So this makes for a specifically challenging and interesting product. But in the end, it's so easy to, in my opinion, look at what other people have done in other areas, like how are movie makers, how are they planning, how are they conceptualizing and then transitioning to realization, how are
Yeah.
car manufacturers going from design to implementation. I think it makes a lot of sense to look at these things and then focus on, okay, what actually makes games different from those examples, and this is where we really should start a new discussion. For the rest, we can build on old discussions and learnings.
Okay.
And this is, to my understanding, partially the idea behind DevOps, what I'm doing to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. Thanks for the explanation. I think it makes a lot of sense. Um, I will nonetheless stress out a little bit on artifacts, because right now we or you explained a little bit about like that we can also follow kind of a chaotic approach, try out this. Okay, the jumping is not working, so we should perhaps focus a little bit more on the jumping. Nonetheless, this kind of chaotic approach where we try out, test, and improve and iterate and see, okay, we lead longer here and there is, of course, quite a headache for some producers. So people that need to hold to deadlines and kind of ensure, yes, after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, we have a product that we can test, that we can ship. So basically, how can we bring chaos into this? Sorry, how can we bring structure into this chaos? And is there perhaps something like, that we then after doing a little bit of chaotic experimentation, then we say, okay, this is our game, this is our core, this is our fun that we have. Um, Now, how can we bring this forward, and what type of artifacts do you use for this? Or also other tools like product backlogs, or also something like user stories or something like that. Is this something that you use in your teams?
Um, yeah, I mean, to some degree, certainly. Again, here I cannot speak too much for example, the game programming teams that actually implement the gameplay. I'm not really involved in their backlogs or anything nowadays. I would assume that it might be a bit similar to what we are doing on the tool side. And yes, I mean, generally, you have a need as a consumer or customer, and that need might be a tool for doing something technically for the implementation. That's typically people I work with. So, for example, gameplay
Mm,
engineers,
yeah,
but they themselves, they might have those needs from somebody else. For example, somebody else needs a character that can jump, and those are their
yeah,
customers or consumers. And so if you have such a clear need formalized, then of course you can define a user story. I personally like user stories because they are concise way of addressing really what you need and why, and they don't jump ahead and already present a solution,
Mhm.
because yeah, very often along the way you can find that maybe the originally envisioned solution might not be the best one,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it gives a bit more room.
Okay. Um, all right. I see we're running out of time, and I also don't want to overextend it. Perhaps one final question would be, um, this person who is doing the concept, the initial concept, the game designer, you said it makes sense to have like not only one game designer who's handing over a GDD and that's it, and then goodbye. Um, but having really more of a team that is working on this from the beginning to the end. But as a person who is mainly involved in the concept or the game design document, what could this game designer do to make your life easier?
Mm, I would say in general, mostly things around clarity and communication. So this can be things like clearly communicating the priority that they see. So one thing that we didn't talk about is a simple framework called it's called Moscow for must-have features, should have features, could have features, and won't have features. So that's a simple way of prioritizing things. So it helps engineers to decide what to focus on. But there are, of course, other ways of prioritizing. Um, Another aspect is yeah, clarity of what's needed. Not trying to be really expressive and non-ambiguous so that it's clear what is really needed, and then basically the goal should be defined, but not necessarily how to get there. There might be ideas mentioned or so, um, but yeah, I think this helps to not have any guesswork when you're implementing something. Am I doing the thing that is really intended, or am I kind of thinking that I might be doing the thing? And so yeah, that comes then in the end down again to communication. So I would say have a clear vision, clear priorities, clear goals, and then talk about it as much as possible in person, and not only once. Keep in the loop, keep talking, and have written documentation, mostly as a reference, so that when you are working on that request 3 days or 3 weeks later, you have this as a more like an aid that may helps you remember what you've already agreed on and talked about together.
Wonderful. Yeah, perfect summary, I think. But yeah, I think I tried to nonetheless do like a summary of the entire thing in half a minute. So what you said was that the vision is actually super important for the success of the game, that the vision is clearly communicated from the very beginning. Then that it doesn't really make sense to have, like a clear break between game design and game development, but that it is kind of one process with a lot of iterations where you're trying to find the fun in the game, which is very core, very essential of it, and that you're having a multidisciplinary team that is definitely able to use a game design document or a concept paper as a basis for discussion, but that you should rather build on it, iterate on it, and test it in order to have something that, yeah, that really brings the fun into the game, and that is also okay to have like kind of a chaotic process in that middle space, so to say, to find the fun. And then afterwards, if you really have like an idea of your core game loop, of your core game, Then you can build this vertical slice that is representative of the entire game. And from this, you can scale it up and kind of go for a more structured process kind of to scale it up.
Yeah, pretty much that sums it up.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. So with that said, thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise here with us. It was really great, and I think I learned a lot, and I hope like all our the people that were watching this video as well. And yeah, again, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully speak to you soon in the community.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Bye
Bye.
bye.